So I am Jeremy Murphy. I'm a director with Sustainability Solutions Group. I'm an urban planner and public engagement specialist. So we're going to get going here with a bit on DE and kind of the development of the model. I'm going to turn it over to Ted, who will regale you.
Not to, would somebody pull out their iPhone and find the definitions for regale, please? Hi, folks. Yeah, but before we get started, speaking of emotive in the room, I did promise that I would promote. They're open now till 6:30, right, Naren? And so we're going to finish promptly on time. And so I'm sure they've got slots available for driving a Leaf, a BMW, or a Volkswagen EV. Okay. So, and they're just outside the main foyer area, past the glass doors there. So. I don't think the cars are. I think you have to go out to the parking lot to get the cars, but have fun with that. So without further ado, and we have a little bit of a, I'm going to have to play a little bit of gymnastics here. The slide decks, and probably my fault, but the slide decks got a little rearranged here. So you might see me flipping some paper. But my job today is to, as Jeremy said, to give you a little bit of an overview on district energy. I've been privileged to be in and around the district energy field at I would call it a reasonably superficial level for a number of years, and had the good blessing to take up with the Sustainability Solutions Group on the Plan4DE tool, international tool that with a number of different partners from around the globe. And I'm sure the team will give you a little bit of an oversight on that when we get going on the tool itself. But just to give you a bit of a quick little cursory 30,000-foot view of a montage of elements of district energy. Is that okay, Naomi?
Yep.
Okay. So we got the first slide right. So there we are. We're off to a great start. So to touch on district energy planning for local government planners. So what is district energy? If those of you that sat in on Jason's session earlier today, I think he did a wonderful job on some contextual pieces. So some of this certainly may be familiar, or you certainly went to District Energy 101 class years ago and you know this inside and out. But what is district energy? Essentially, we took a quote out of work that CDAC, which is a data group out of Simon Fraser University, when they put out their, in this case, in 2016, they put out a data inventory of district energy across the country based on 2014 data. So the quote is, a district energy system is a system designed to supply thermal energy and possibly electricity, which make it combined heat and power, to multiple buildings from a central plant or from several interconnected but distributed plants. So essentially, district energy has three core components. So it has the energy center. The top one here is just a picture of the face of NMAX, and I think NMAX we have presented earlier today. Now, then the thermal energy from the center gets distributed through a distribution network. This happens to be St. Paul, Minnesota, into a network of energy transfer stations, which make an interface with the actual buildings that they provide heat to. In this case, example being the Louvre in Paris. So the business as usual, conventional heating, conventional thermal power plants, typically, and this is the example is on the left, typically are only 30 to 50% efficient and release huge amounts of waste heat to the local environment. As opposed to, on the right, a modern district energy system or combined heat and power system is typically 80 to 90% efficient, meaning that almost all of the primary energy burned is converted to useful energy. So now this is a slide, I mentioned CDAC. We'll find it here, there we go. So this is from their 2016 inventory based on 2014 data. And I plucked out four slides and four pieces, two tables, two figures, that hopefully you can get, you can see a little bit from close, if not, can you see it in the back room? See it okay? Okay, so the first one on the left, figure one, is the district energy systems by province. So combined BC and Ontario basically represent about half of the district energy systems in the country, and that's at a total of 159 at this last count. Figure 6 on the side gives you an example of where those district energy systems are. So primarily in large population centers, and many of you know with Markham and Guelph and New Westminster and Vancouver, etc. Surrey presented earlier today with Jason. There's a number of large leading edge district energy systems in main population centers. But there's reasonable representation in the smaller communities as well. But compared to Europe, no comparison. For example, Austria has approximately 1,200 biomass district energy facilities, small scale. I think I've got a slide we maybe quickly go over to have a peek at that. But there's plenty of opportunities for small scale biomass or broadly district energy systems across the country here in Canada. Table 1 is what type of facilities are there. The majority of the facilities provide heating only. Combination, I think it's about a third are heating, water, and/or steam and cooling. And then a smaller number are based on electricity, so combined heat and power. We had a little discussion a couple of hours ago around, a question came up from University of Victoria around cooling and the need for more cooling as the weather, as the climate warms over time. And certainly I think we can all see the necessity for that going forward. The last one here, table 3 on the bottom. Most facilities, 75% of them serve more than one customer. Some of the most common customer types include commercial, institutional, community centers, rec centers, government or public service buildings, and education. So they're often a very good anchor load for starting a district energy system and building out in the periphery. So this is a slide from district energy in cities, and if you have not read it and would love to get a little bit of a primer on what's going on in the world on district energy in cities, I'd highly recommend this. They look at 45 champion cities around the world, largely large metropolitan district energy systems, but nonetheless they dissect them in all different directions and give you a good overview of the nature of district energy internationally. But basically this slide takes us from the left-hand side in what's called the first generation systems, which started roughly around 1880, and moving to the right to the fourth generation, which is roughly 2020 and beyond. A little anecdote here, apparently London, Ontario, in the 1880s had the first district energy system in Canada, and it distributed heat to the neighboring government, university, and hospital facilities. Now the fourth generation systems operate at lower temperatures, resulting in reduced heat loss compared to previous generations. And they make it feasible to connect to areas with low energy density, and particularly areas with low energy buildings, as some of us have been exposed to the energy step codes in BC and coming in Ontario and the federal government and other jurisdictions as well. So buildings are being built to be much more lower energy demand, and these fourth generation systems are of a lower temperature and complement that lower demand. So the benefits of district energy. So first and foremost, district energy is an energy supply, and the first rule is to become as energy efficient as you can in your building stock. So the benefits are the synergistic relationship between energy efficiency in buildings and district energy systems. Of course, one of the benefits is that you have a range of local and renewable energy sources that you can draw on. Four examples here: waste to energy, biomass, geoexchange, geothermal, natural water bodies such as Toronto, or a neat aquifer under the Orlando Airport in Sweden, and then integrated renewables such as the city of North Vancouver that's also interconnecting their individual district energy systems. Of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. One of the advantages of a district energy system is that it's fuel agnostic, meaning you can put a variety of different fuels in, and a lot of district energy systems start with natural gas. And then they back off the natural gas and bring in something like biomass, and the natural gas becomes a peak fuel and or a backup fuel. Of course, the local green economy, you can see the listing of benefits from establishing a local district energy system. And I will, if I have it handy, just wanted to read something out just in August. It's from a publication by the Columbia Institute. It's called Jobs for Tomorrow, Canada's Building Trades and Net Zero Emissions. And it suggested that building small district energy systems in 50% of Canada's metropolitan areas could create more than 547,000 construction jobs by 2050. The last one is arguably by far the most important one, and it's a synergistic relationship with this district energy. In BC, we have the Climate Action Charter, and there's 3 commitments in the Climate Action Charter to which 187 of the 190 local governments have voluntarily signed on to. And the third commitment is to work towards creating complete, compact, energy-efficient communities. And by and large, a district energy system can become the centerpiece of that compact, complete community, and you get many other attributes with it, which can be pedestrian-friendly, transit-friendly, more socially interactive, etc. Now, this is a project that I had the pleasure of a small contract commissioning Sustainability Solutions Group, and it looked at 4 of the communities in British Columbia that had reached the furthest out in a time frame for climate action and related targets. Those communities are North Cowichan, Nelson, North Vancouver, and Vancouver. And using a nifty Gephi tool, I think it was called, Yule, we looked at the similarities of the common elements that those communities identified they needed to implement, either a policy or an activity, to reach their long-term targets. And as you can see from here, district energy basically won out. VKT, or vehicle kilometers traveled, was second, along with renewable energy on buildings. So there's a lot of elements here that you can see. The big 3 are focusing on making the center core of your neighborhood and or city district energy friendly. This is a quick example of.
I was just wondering if on those little, because I couldn't see the things where the little dots, does that mean the amount of GHGs that action was identified within their action plan?
No, excellent question, but no, it's just the number of interconnections between those 4 communities. So how those 4 communities had a lot to say about district energy as part of their solutions to meeting their long-term 2040, 2050 objectives. Good question. This is an example of, on the left, Atlanta, on the right, Barcelona, and they have roughly the same population. But you can see the sprawl on one versus the compact city on the other. And you can see the greenhouse gas, the carbon emissions from transportation. The 2 are substantially different, as you might imagine. You don't have to travel as far. As a matter of fact, you could walk, take transit, take a bike, what have you. And those kind of dense communities are ready for district energy, or in the case of Barcelona, have a number of systems. This is just simply an example of the nodes that cities have in their village centers, in their downtown core, where there's a concentration of buildings and floor space. So they lend themselves to a district energy facility, and these anchors can be the centerpiece for which you would build out, either connecting with existing buildings that may be hydronic, or looking at developing plans to build further developments, particularly more concentrated, possibly high-rise, commercial, institutional, in and around those centers. So they become nodes or livable centers within your community. Now this is something that's come up. I thought I would put this slide in because it's become quite topical. As Jason noted this earlier today, the net zero energy, net zero step code has been brought out in BC. Ontario and the federal government are working or have their own in place. The European Union, with at least 10 countries, do as well, I think Australia. So what is becoming the norm is low carbon, energy efficient buildings. So do you need a district energy system to supply that? Well, yes, but it can be more challenging. You might need more concentrated, less distance from a district energy facility. and greater floor space overall. But there are a couple of things to consider, and this last bullet was taken out of the piece from the STEP code when they spoke on district energy. So first, fully recognize the shift towards net zero energy ready buildings. So a tool like Plan4DE can do just that if you have the information to input into it. District energy has an advantage over building specific energy options in that it can provide local renewable energy sources that aren't available on a building by building basis, such as sewer heat, geothermal, interconnected geoexchange, deep water cooling, like I mentioned with the City of Toronto. And another example is as some of the buildings get built at that standard or beyond, they become net positive buildings and they can actually contribute to the district energy system. This is based on the report that I just showcased a few minutes ago. Of the 45 champion cities, all of them have long-term energy strategies that specifically factor in district energy. All of them have identified the energy efficient benefits with district energy infrastructure. And I'll try and talk around this slide change, but basically this is done by the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, so they're not exactly a district energy advocate per se, but they certainly speak in support of it throughout this document. They look at the role of cities in four different categories. Those categories are, find them here, planner and regulator, facilitator, provider and consumer, and coordinator and advocate. Just focusing on planner and regulator, you can see, and I apologize, unfortunately this is small. So what this basically says is there's a number of targets that all of those 45 champion cities have done to one extent or the other, have established, say, greenhouse gas emission reductions targets or district energy specific targets or combinations of these. So this is number 40, there's 45 cities overall. So you can see a number of the champion cities have a combination of different targets that they have set, and many of them are achieving. The one example I probably would highlight, I guess, here at Vancouver, has identified a share of their total GHG reductions to be met by district energy. And through their neighborhood energy strategy, they have targeted to deliver 11% of the city's 33% reduction by 2020 to be from district energy. That equates to 120,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year. And I think, folks, this is one that I was a little surprised to see in it, but I'm glad it is, and I'll be real quick. There's a lot of talk about the larger communities, but what about small town Canada? What about some of the rural or remote communities? What about the remote communities wanting to get off diesel? Do they have a clustering of buildings, etc.? You can see from Austria here that I mentioned approximately 1,200 small-scale biomass district energy facilities. I was on a tour that included Austria and saw some of them. They're amazing to see, and really, with exception to some variables like cost of natural gas or hydro in BC, they can be very, very competitive and an opportunity for local communities to get off some of the external sources of energy. City of Enderby in the Okanagan in British Columbia here, population 2,950. They've got, Burkhardt has now got 11 commercial, institutional, and residential customers in his modest-sized biomass district energy facility. And something I mentioned a little earlier today to the group is that NRCan and Natural Research Council, is establishing a network. They're working in the process of establishing a network of 12 biomass CHP facilities across Canada, and particularly in the northern and remote communities. And the last slide, I promise, is this is the nature. You saw the fourth generation, just the nature of the evolution of district energy in the world, but also in Canada. And this is, I will quote based on the bullets that you'll see as familiar from Ken Church of NRCan, who's kind of Mr. District Energy within the federal government for across Canada. And the quote is out of a recent report, a recent paper he did for the International District Energy Association out of Boston, and it reads, "In Canada, the driving force behind the development of district energy has changed from the engineering office to the urban planning studio. and the technology is now seen as an urban planning tool, and hence Plan4DE, one that can be used to achieve multiple goals and objectives within the community. With this shift, there has been a change in perspective from looking at the cost of heat to the value of the asset. This calls for a more holistic evaluation in decision making. The use of estimated value rather than cost in business models creates a change in mindset. The focus becomes communal rather than corporate, local rather than imported, and economic benefit rather than financial return.
All done.
Thank you.
Thank you for regaling us.
So I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to the history of Plan for District Energy, or Plan4DE. It was a project funded by the International Energy Agency through the District Heating Annex. And it was a partnership with a range of interesting and crazy organizations: International District Energy Association, Government of BC, IEA Energy Analysis, which is a firm out of Copenhagen that has designed and worked on some of the largest district energy systems in the world and most advanced ones, including Copenhagen's district energy systems. A really interesting group of people. Farallon Consultants is a Victoria-based consultancy that specializes in waste heat recovery. Stephen Salter works with us on an ongoing basis on projects across Canada, and actually just did a scan of district energy for Chile, which was a really fascinating project. And then GDLO, which is an architecture firm based in Seattle and an urban planning firm as well. And finally us, and we were the project leads. And so this was a really diverse team to bring to the question of district energy, which is typically a field dominated by engineers. And we are definitely not all engineers. So we did a whole bunch of background work to try and understand the state of district energy, the drivers of district energy, what makes it work, what doesn't make it work, what are the political factors, what are the geographical factors, what are the economic factors. And these are a series of reports that were published, and they're available from Plan4DE.ssg.coop. In particular, I think the literature review is a really fascinating piece that looks at the characteristics of the built environment that enable or disable district energy. And we took a bit of an unusual approach, drawing on both our experience in the building design world and GGL's experience, where we used a design charrette to design this model. And so we all got together in this remote Buddhist retreat center in the wilderness of Nova Scotia for 3.5 days and just geeked out about district energy and all of the factors that we considered in thinking about district energy. And it was a fascinating process because it definitely gave us some insights that I think we wouldn't have got if we weren't all in isolation together. But I think the biggest factor we realize is that typically district energy field right now is a responsive industry. It responds to a built environment that already exists. And so our emphasis was, let's create a built environment that enables district energy from the get-go, as opposed to limiting the solution to a built environment that in many cases in North America is not conducive to district energy, and it's an ongoing struggle to make it work in that built environment. And hence the name Plan for District Energy, and it's literally urban planning for district energy. And this quote speaks to that. So when we look at one of the primary issues that decides whether district energy will work or not, it's really about energy density. And energy density, when you look at the drivers of that, consists of urban structure, building morphology, and climate, which is really beyond the influence of anyone that I know. But certainly building morphology and urban structure are determined by municipalities. So that puts the ultimate determinants, we would argue, of district energy, some of the key ones, in the hands of municipalities. And so, if you look at land use and built form, those are really pieces that are determined by municipal governments. And so we thought, well, really the role of helping to organize district energy systems has never really been a focus of municipal governments. Certainly some municipal governments have built district energy systems in contexts where it's made sense, but the planners in general are not considering district energy when they're working on an official plan or a secondary plan or so forth. So our objectives then became very different than they might have been for an engineering-focused model, because we wanted something that was easy to access, because planners, we know, like city planners, are not typically are as mathematically literate as, for example, engineers are. We wanted something that was more accessible, something that was persuasive and educational, so the act of using it in itself would help elucidate the determinants of district energy and how you might change the way in which your official plan or secondary plan or so forth is set up to support district energy. And then we also looked at the kind of ecosystem of tools out there right now, and there's some really great tools when you get to the stage of designing a district energy system. And we have RedScreen in Canada. Has anyone here used RedScreen? Yeah, so it's a very useful tool kind of at the pre-feasibility level. We have some feasibility tools. We have then engineering models, most of which are proprietary, owned by specific firms, engineering firms who design district energy systems. But we wanted something that was more upstream. So this is like even before you're thinking about building a district energy system, about when you're actually designing the built environment. And so we call it the pre-feasibility. It's the sphere that Plan4DE was really designed for. We say 5 to 30 years out, and plus or minus 25 to 50%. And because we were working with EA, this Danish firm, we ended up with something that actually works for a wide spectrum. It's actually much more sophisticated than we anticipated. And that had some design implications in that we need to build multiple interfaces for it because it actually can work quite well at the feasibility level as well, which was not in our original intention. So the way Plan4DE works, the basic premise is that you're comparing two cases. You're comparing a business as use case, or business as usual case, in which you have individual heating systems in buildings, and then you're comparing a district energy case. And you're comparing it in terms of finances. So it's an economic thing. Which makes more sense from a purely financial perspective? District energy system or individual heating in dwellings. And of course, there's all sorts of combinations that you can have in either of those cases. And the model does a whole bunch of sort of mathematical gymnastics to calculate what the optimal district energy case is, and you can specify what the cases are in buildings in the business as usual case. And then it just compares those two. And it gives you this really magical curve, which we've spent too many hours looking at. But basically, you have the cost of energy, of district energy, which is a declining cost. So as your heat density increases, the cost of district energy also decreases. Individual heating in buildings is flat. It doesn't really matter what the heat density is, it's always going to be the same price. So when you're in the red area, it makes more sense to have individual heating systems. It's more cost effective. When you're in the green area, it makes more sense for district energy. So then what we do is set up the model so that you can tweak the characteristics of the built environment to move this yellow bar. So if it's in the red area, you want to tweak it, so you're increasing heat density, adding different types of buildings, and so forth, to move the bar into the green area where district energy makes sense. And if you're in the green area, you may want to increase the viability of district energy. But your goal is to get in the green area, not the red area, and then you know district energy makes sense. So with that, I will pass it over to Julia to show how the model works.
All right, thanks, Will. So I'm going to try to give you guys the 5 o'clock on conference day 2 version of what's going on in this model and how we put it together. But if you have any questions, just chime in. I'll try to get us going so that we can get to our workshop portion. So, yeah, basically as we were doing all these gymnastics that you all mentioned, trying to consider aspects such as network, piping length, different system types, different fuels, costs, maintenance costs, and timing for those things, it started to get a little bit complicated. And so we developed 3 different versions of the model, ranging from basic, where all the inputs are most of the inputs are either already set and the calculations are sort of locked and hidden so that you can't mess it up. And then basically over to the advanced version, where there's no friendly user interface as there is in the basic version, and you can modify all the calculations inputs as you wish. So the applications basically, or back to the model versions, which ones you're going to use obviously depends on what data availability you have, what your technical capacity is, and what type of outputs you want to be looking at. And the applications, the type of outputs we're going to be assessing are basically evaluating development plans, particularly at the neighborhood scale, exploring alternative development scenarios for different density levels, scanning for district energy potential by analyzing existing neighborhoods, and hopefully we'll find out some new applications as more people test out the model and use it for different purposes. So the inputs, hopefully you can see this a bit. I'm going to just walk you through what you need, what kind of information you need to actually run an analysis, and you guys will be doing this shortly, so you'll sort of be tested. The first piece is what's our area, what's our district area. So there's also a guidebook available that helps you to look at how to assess what area might be, or assess and choose what area might be appropriate to look at. Then you need to tell the model where exactly you are, what climate zone you're in. The lifetime of the district heating network, which is essentially the time period over which you're looking to do your analysis. You can choose to consider revenues from the district energy system or not in the cost optimization calculations. And then the length of your piping network. And you can either choose to have the model figure that out for you, or you might already know the configuration of your system and you can enter that in. Next, you have to tell the model what kind of buildings are in your area. And basically there's 20 different categories there to choose from, roughly. And you can either enter in just the number of buildings by type that you have, as well as the total floor area, which is ideal. If you don't have that, you're able to just enter in buildings by number. And then there's also energy use intensities, which are based on your climate zone. You can also override those if you have better data. And then the next piece is telling the model what, basically it's the economical optimization of the district heating mix, which is telling the model whether you want it to calculate what's the best type of combination of systems to put in place based on the heating demand that you have. And you can also choose from different types of district energy systems based on the types of fuels that you might actually have available to you. And finally, you need to put in your individual heating mix. So that's just basically the scenario where you don't have a district energy system, the one that we're comparing everything, the DE scenario to, and you need to tell it what buildings, what type of technologies are used in the buildings that you have in place. So we did do a test run as a final part of the project. Basically, this was done by our partner company, GGLO, and they put together a hypothetical neighborhood with a hypothetical two-phase plan in place. And basically, this is just showing the first inputs of the different building types that went into the model, into the Plan4DE model. And you have this red bar up here showing the energy density that is required. And here's where we're at with the phase 1 of the plan. And then basically testing it out with the second phase combined. And you can see that we find from Plan4DE that the district energy scenario becomes more viable, if you will, as compared to the individual building scenario. And then the outputs, what do you get out of it? There's sort of 3 main outputs that you get, and the first is a cost comparison. And again, I'll let you guys dig into this a bit more in the exercise, but it's split up by different aspects such as the capital cost, operations, maintenance costs for both the individual heating versus district heating scenarios. You get that cost curve that Yul showed you. So here again, you have the individual heating cost that remains flat, and the district energy system cost that is being reduced as our density increases. And this is where we are right now in the scenario that we're looking at. And then finally, it also gives you emissions based on the 2 different scenarios. So that if that's something that's important to you, you can run through the model with different scenarios and compare the 2 based on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy. Are there any questions actually before we go get into exercise?
I
Yeah.
was curious, because you said like the example that you used, the model community. So you had it so that you had phase one, which had a certain amount of density and a certain amount of buildings, and that wasn't a cost-effective approach to use district energy, right?
Mhm.
But if you're phasing in your development and you're building that section first, and it doesn't make financial sense to do the district energy system for that, but you're thinking longer term, how do you phase in? Because now you've built these other ones and they have individual units, and now you're locked in to that individual unit, and then you have to kind of factor in the life cycle cost or the life cycle of that individual locked-in unit before you can kind of like, I was just wondering if that kind of calculations or playing around came into play.
Yeah, well, I can answer that one because that was actually a model of a real situation in Seattle that we turned into an archetype, and that became the case for actually putting in district energy system because they could show that even though it wasn't viable in phase one, it would be in phase two, and they just had to factor that timing in the business case.
So they just have to factor that business
Yeah.
case of like, okay, I got an asset, we're putting this asset in,
Yeah.
it won't pay itself back, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that actually allowed them to avoid locking out district energy system, which was the default,
Right.
which was where they were going.
Just to clarify then, were they talking about just putting the pipes in the ground so they wouldn't have to dig up the street later, or were they actually having an operating system?
Operating system.
That wasn't actually my question.
Follow-up question.
So my question is, in Guelph, we've hit a bit of a roadblock with our DE system, and one of the big questions that came up was an anchor tenant or an anchor customer. I don't see that in this model, and I will admit that I was skeptical that that was something that's necessary. It seems to me that it's something that is maybe based on certain assumptions about DE system history and not necessarily on market and economic and technical realities, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Do you have to take that into consideration, the sort of evolution of the system and the sequence of adding load so that you somehow have this magical anchor customer to get you over the hump and then you add incremental load after that, or can you do it without that magic component?
Well, basically the way the model is set up is to look at what's already there. So in your assessment, you can include the anchor, your sort of the startup kind of tenant, if you will, or you can exclude that, and so you can see from the get-go whether it's already viable or not. But I don't know if there's anything else.
Yeah, I mean, if you mean like anchor load, like in terms of hospitals or whatever, there's 20 different building types, and you can add others if you want in there to see what the impact of having a major building that has heat demand is on the overall viability of the system for a particular context.
But there isn't sort of a general rule of thumb that says that
You need it.
no anchor, no system.
No, definitely not.
I do have one question. I do apologize in advance because I sat down late. Does this take into account non-heating? In other words, cooling as well, or is it just heating specific DED?
We have a cooling version, which hasn't been released. That is kind of a parallel version with all the cooling technologies and cooling modes instead. But it actually hasn't been publicly released yet. And it wasn't actually part of our contract.
The reason I ask is in our region, combined heating and cooling approaches are going to be very effective when you're doing ambient loop systems. And that has, contextually, that's a great way to develop district energy in capital region. So if that's something that can be sort of evolved,
Yeah.
that would probably be very powerful because then you can consider balanced loads, applications, and use and so on.
Just to comment on that for information, ambient systems can be great in some situations. One of the things that they add complexity is because ambient basically means that your water is at a very low temperature, it's an ambient temperature. So when it gets to any of the buildings, you need a heat pump in every one of your buildings to raise the temperature of that. You don't just have an ambient transfer station, you also have a heat pump. And that can add complexity, they can add cost for the tenants. And so that's not completely known yet in what situations that's favorable and when it's not. The Richmond, the Blue Island system does that right now. And so as, they move forward, they'll see how that plays out. They're running into some challenges right now, and we'll see kind of how that works out.
Well, I'm referencing, and I had a particular example that's already been built, which is Green Eagle, which is energy sharing side and assumptions. You get a battery with geo exchange.
Right.
To residential towers that can heat, an office tower that requires cooling and refrigeration. CRU that it's a grocery store that has 24/7 refrigeration, so heat has to go somewhere. So
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about geo, there's another level of complexity you have to consider, right?
Of course.
First of all, it's extremely expensive. Second of all, in
district
many
energy is
cases,
extremely expensive, so yeah.
actually in a lot of cases, district energy is actually quite a bit cheaper. We've just done some studies. For cooling in particular, we did a feasibility study in Vancouver, about 5 buildings that are going up. I mentioned this another session. And so that, it's 5 kind of 10-story buildings, let's say, on average. And we just centralized the cooling, and compared to the base loads, you're getting about 40% savings on the life cycle cost, just because you're going to reduce the total capacity of chillers that you need. So, and that's really favorable to your developers as well, because they don't need to all have cooling towers on top of their building anymore. So they all get their rooftop back. And also cooling in BC, so if we're talking about this region, where electricity is almost zero carbon, it's a different conversation. So it's more centered on cost, less on carbon, because you're not really avoiding much carbon. So I said that. I'll let someone else talk.
Just talking about, like, in Ontario, we have very high cost electricity, low cost natural gas. So in general, when we're talking about any kind of measures to improve energy efficiency and reduce greenhouse gases, usually we have the economic conversation about the electricity, and then that's kind of the sugar coating to get at the pill, which is greenhouse gas emission reduction by reducing natural gas consumption. So it seems to me that it'd be really of value to be able to look at both of those things, both the heating and cooling together, because one is going to have much more favorable economics, the other will have much more favorable greenhouse gas emission reductions.
Yeah, we did in our design charrette in the woods of Nova Scotia, we did actually look at combining those two pieces, but the complexity of one of the really fascinating pieces of this is this optimization model that's built into the tool, and the complexity of adding cooling into that. You already see it operate slowly enough on a computer right now, and that actually the firm that we worked with, IEA, had done that before actually for Helsinki in Finland. But it just wasn't, we didn't think that it met the use case of targeting planners in the way that we were trying to with this project. But certainly it is possible.
So when you have this, when you have this model run for the heating, and then you have another model run for the cooling, how would they talk to each other?
You'd have to, it'd be a redesign. It would be a new project. Yeah.
So if you have funding for that.
I think you may have said this, but I apologize if I missed it when I'm running up to a phone conversation with my 4-year-old daughter. Did you take into consideration only sort of first generation heat, or also waste heat?
Waste heat's in there as an option.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
Follow-up question on that. When waste heat's in there as an option, what cost does it incorporate?
You can set it, but there's what's the default? I can't remember what the default is, but it is adjustable if you want.
So just like a cost per kilowatt hour or something like that? It's not like it doesn't incorporate like the distance to the waste heat source and the technology that's required to use that?
There's assumptions around that, which again you can adjust.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it does have assumptions.
The model is open source, so you can download the advanced version of the model for free. And it is open source, and if you do that, I wish you the best of luck. Figuring it out. It's just a very complex model. And so like you can, yes.
Comprehensive.
It's very comprehensive. And I've been comprehending it as best I can for almost a year now. No, it's just, there's a lot going on. So I fully encourage you to download the advanced version and see the relationships between the different components of district energy and neighborhoods and the assumptions that are made. It just, be prepared to spend some time, that's all. All right, we're gonna do an exercise, people. And I have to admit, I am the team member who has had the least direct experience with building this model, so of course it makes the most sense that I am going to lead you through this exercise of how to use this model. But no, I do have some recent experience trying to apply it to a few different neighborhoods, one in West Van. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up a couple computers on the table so you can get your hands on it, or so that you can talk through us who will have our hands on it, maybe, as the case may be. But we've selected this 6-block neighborhood in Victoria. And if you've ever walked through Victoria and thought maybe we could really use the district energy system here, that's what we're going to figure out. So this is Quadra Street over here, and Vancouver Street in the middle, and remind me, Cook Street on the far side. And Fort Street at the bottom, and Yates Street in the middle, and what's at the top?
Pandora, probably.
Pandora?
Or Johnson.
Sounds about right. Johnson, I think it is Johnson. I drew a yellow line over it so I couldn't read it. So that's the neighborhood we have. And so in the neighborhood we have these multifamily buildings. Some are low-rise, some are high-rise. Low-rise being 3 stories and under. We have these retail. Most are standalone. A couple are warehouses, kind of warehouse, they're car dealerships, which are essentially a warehouse. And some are in the middle are kind of strip malls. And then we have an office space, a hotel, a restaurant, and a strip of about 9 mixed-use buildings that are residential retail mix. So that's the building makeup in the area on these 6 blocks. So these are the 6 blocks, A through F. And what we're going to do with the exercise, we have, I'll pass these out, but we have all of the building number, the number of buildings and floor areas associated with those buildings here. And then we're going to take that information and we're going to see if we can justify a district energy system in this 6-block radius. So we're going to start with some of the basic inputs. We're not going to consider revenue for this time, just to keep things simple. So what I mean by that is, if you were to consider revenue, you would be considering the revenue generated from your district energy system, which would typically have to be, well, it would generally turn out to be a co-heat and power district energy system, and so you'd be selling the heat and the electricity off of it. But for this exercise, it gets a little complicated, so we're not going to consider revenue this time. If you want, you can play with it at your table just to see what happens. We can play with the location of the energy center. We know the network length on that 6 blocks radius. It's about a total pipe length of 1 kilometer. And then we'll go through the 6 blocks and add the building by number of type numbers and by building area. So we'll add each block and see if district energy becomes viable, comparing these different systems. So we'll get the tool to economically optimize the systems that it's considering. Let's not consider coal. I don't think we have any coal to burn. No, we do, but let's not consider it because that's ridiculous. And straw, I mean, we don't, we could do like straw biomass, but why really in this case for Victoria? So we'll do like wood chips and natural gas and some wood pellets and that sort of thing. And then for simplicity's sake, we're going to assume that if all the individual buildings are individually heated, it's by natural gas. So we'll just keep it simple. The model, you can divide this up however you want between up to 3 different heating sources. So this is applying natural gas to all of the buildings considered. All of the buildings individually would be powered by natural gas. Just keep things simple. And then we're going to see what happens if we can build this district energy system or not, based on these inputs. Yes? Yes. You are ready. I heard earlier that you were ready.